Let's make it happen now.
Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So sorry for the 2-week delay in videos. It's been a little busy around here, but you don't want to hear about that. Instead, let's just get to the content of this video. Also, the lighting in here is going to be a little bit different. My Aperture 300D Mark II is currently in pieces on the floor because it's fixing to go to a photo shoot, and I didn't feel like putting it all back together and ripping it all down just for a little YouTube video. So let's get to it. In my last video, I answered my #1 most asked question, which was how far away from my subjects I was when I was taking the picture, which you can watch if you click the link above right here. In this video, I'm gonna answer my second most asked question, which is how do I get everybody in focus with such a narrow depth of field in my group photos? So to help us out in this video, I've drawn a little diagram in Photoshop. First off, I should mention that I mostly shoot with long focal lengths, like 135mm 1.8, 200mm 2.0 lenses. So I'm gonna be really far away when I'm taking these group photos. I really like the compressed looks that these lenses offer, but you also have very narrow depth of field. And so it begs the question, how do I get everybody in focus shooting almost wide open? And so this video is going to answer that question. Before we get to the diagram, let me kind of explain how this works. So you control the focus plane with the aperture ring. So you've got the aperture inside the lens. It can be really small, it can open wide open. And the more wide open you have, the more narrow depth of field you have. You have that nice creamy background and foreground. And then as you close that aperture down, everything becomes more and more in focus. So that focus plane widens. When you're shooting with a 135mm 1.8 or a 200mm 2.0 lens, you've got this super razor thin depth of field focus plane. So it's really, really narrow. And most people don't realize that the aperture ring isn't the only way you can control that. That's also controlled depending on how close or far away from your subjects you are. If you're like as close as you are to me right now, this is maybe 2 feet, we have a very narrow depth of field. I'm shooting at 2.8 with a 24mm lens right now, so we have a fairly narrow depth of field. But if you start to scoot the lens farther and farther away from me, that depth of field starts to widen and more comes into focus. The same applies for long focal lengths. So when you're shooting a group photo and you've got 10 or so people, you've got to be way far back with a 135 or 200mm lens. So the farther back you get, the more room you have to deal with. So you can shoot almost wide open and still have most people in focus, if not everybody. And on top of that, I line people up to where they stay within that focus plane. And you can line a lot of people up in a very, very tight space. And I'm gonna explain how that works here in a minute. So like I said, the key to keeping everybody in focus is to keep everybody within that focus plane, which basically just keep everybody in a straight line. And you can do that in multiple rows of people, but just keep them really close to each other. Let's go ahead and look at the diagram. So here we have a little family of 4 people. I have them in a straight line here. Here's a top-down view of them so you can see that they're all in a straight line. Here's the illustrated focus plane of f1.8. You can clearly see that everybody's easily in focus. But what if we decide to put them in 2 lines like this? Now we have 2 people in the front and 2 people in the back. From the top-down view, you can see that we have 2 lines, but they're still very close together. In this case, I would focus on the middlemost person in this group, which would be this person right here. Here's where everyone would be if you shot this with f1.8. You could kind of get away with it, but it's starting to get really tight. When you start to separate people in lines like this, you might consider stepping up to the next aperture range, like f2.0, to make sure everybody's in focus. Here's a group of 13 people, but even though there's a lot of people, we still only have them in 3 rows, and they're still very close to each other. Here's the top-down view. Again, I would focus on somebody in the middle row of the group. At this point, f1.8 is probably out of the question. You could maybe get away with f2.0, but it's still gonna be really tight. At this point, you're probably gonna wanna go up to 2.8 or maybe even a little bit higher. So now you can see how easily it is to get a large group like this and have everybody in focus with a very narrow aperture. Of course, these aperture ranges are gonna change depending on what lens you're using, so the best thing to do is just experiment with it and get used to what works with your lens. It's a good practice to always preview your image in the back of your camera when you're doing group shots like this. Look at the people in the front row and look at the people in the back row, because you'll be focusing on people in the middle row if you have 3 rows like this, just to make sure that people are still in focus. That's it. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, why not give it a thumbs up, subscribe, only if you want to, and I will see you in the next video.